Welcome to DDRC members, staff, and guests. We ask for your patience during this virtual meeting. Multiple staff members are behind the scenes to make sure that the meeting runs smoothly and all applicants and citizens are able to communicate with the Commission at the appropriate times. During the meeting, you will see live images or still images of DDRC members and staff. However, images of the applicant and public will not be visible.
The public will also be able to participate via three methods. Oops, I'm sorry. There we go.
We've already been here.
Yeah, sorry, I was pulling up some things accidentally on the screen, trying to clear it.
Okay.
And I think Mr. Baker is with us now. All right, here we go. So the public will also be able to participate via three methods. When participating, please provide your name for documentation purposes. So you may watch, email, phone in, or log into a web session. If you choose to watch, the public may stream the meetings through City TV, which may be accessed at www.youtube.com/user/Columbia-SC-Government. If emailing, you may submit letters and statements via email to cocboardmeeting@columbiasc.gov leading up to and or during the meeting, as this account will be monitored during the meeting. Emails and letters will be read into the record. If you're phoning in, you may call 855-925-2801. When prompted, please enter the meeting code 7949. So if you're participating by phone, you have three options on how you can participate. *1 will allow you to listen. *2 will allow you to record a voicemail message that will be read into the record. And *3 will allow a participant to be placed in a queue so that they may speak live when prompted. If you're calling in live, please make sure your computer audio is muted. And then you may stream the proceedings via the web at publicinput.com/COC-DDRC-October. So if we're ready, we'll have a roll call. Mr. Baker. Mr. Baker, are you perhaps muted? Mr. Broom?
He's here, but he's muted.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Ms. Fuller-Wilt?
Here.
Ms. Jaco?
Here.
Mr. Salibi?
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Savory?
Here.
And Mr. Wolf?
Here.
We have quorum.
Thanks. In order to avoid ex parte communications, DDRC members are under strict instructions not to discuss cases under consideration with the public or with each other outside of the public forum. The meeting typically starts with staff calling the case, giving a summary of the project, and then calling on the applicant to present if they wish. Decisions are typically made in one evening. Decisions may be appealed within 30 days to a court of competent jurisdiction. Oaths will be administered individually as we hear either from applicants or from live speakers. Applicants with requests before the DDRC are allotted a presentation time of 10 minutes. This time should include, but is not limited to, an overview of the project, case history, and any pertinent meetings held regarding the request. This time also includes all persons presenting information on behalf of the applicant, such as attorneys, engineers, and architects. This time limit does not include any questions asked by the DDRC or staff regarding requests. Members of the general public are given the opportunity to address their concerns in intervals of 2 minutes. Applicants may have 5 minutes to respond. Staff has a timer and will make presenters aware when their time has expired. At this point, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are many changes to the agenda. So beginning with our consent agenda, item number 2, 511 through 537 Saluda Avenue, which is a request for preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill and design approval for exterior changes in Wales Garden Architectural Conservation District has been deferred. Likewise, an item from the regular agenda, 2030 Divine Street, which is a request for design approval for exterior changes and preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill. This is in the 5 Points National Register District. This has been moved up to the consent agenda. We worked out some details with the applicants prior to the meeting today.
Very
Under
good.
the regular agenda, 1025 through 1043 Hugh Street, a request for a certificate of design approval for new construction in the Innovista Design District has been deferred, as have multiple other projects, beginning with 1214 through 1216, as well as 1218 Taylor Street. These are requests for a certificate of design approval for exterior changes and preliminary certification of the Bailey Bill. These fall within the Columbia Commercial National Register Historic District. 1001 Senate Street, a request for design approval for exterior changes, which is both the National Register structure and a Bailey Bill structure, has been deferred. 2531 Gervais Street, request for preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill for an individual landmark has been deferred, as has 1231 Gervais Street, which was a certificate of design approval for exterior changes to an individual landmark. And lastly, 2614 Kewah Avenue, a request for a certificate of design approval for demolition in the Shandon Community Character Area has been deferred.
Okay, thank you. The DDRC uses the consent agenda to approve non-controversial or routine matters by a single motion and vote. If a member of the DDRC or the general public wants to discuss an item on the consent agenda, that item is removed from the consent agenda and considered during the meeting. The DDRC then approves the remaining consent agenda items. Will staff please read the consent agenda?
Certainly. The first item is 1110 Woodrow Street, a request for preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill in the Melrose Heights Oak Lawn Architectural Conservation District. The next is 1501 Richland Street, a request for preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill for an individual landmark within the landmark district. 1320 Richland Street, request for design approval for an addition in the landmark district. 1601 Hampton Street, a request for preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill for an individual landmark. 213 through 215 Church Street, a request for preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill in the Granby Architectural Conservation District. 1224 Hugh Street, a request for a certificate of design approval for exterior changes in the West Gervais Historic Protection Area. And once again, 2030 Divine Street, which came up from the regular agenda. It's a request for design approval for exterior changes and preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill. And this falls within the 5 Points National Register District.
Is there anyone from the DDRC that would like any item removed from the consent agenda? All right, hearing none. Is there anyone from the public that would like to have an item removed from the consent agenda? Please communicate by sending an email to cocboardmeeting@columbiasc.gov. Please communicate by phone by pressing *2 to leave a voicemail or *3 to speak in person, and we will pause to allow communication from the public.
Hello, Mr. Chair. This is Andrew Livingood. I do not have any callers that have indicated they wish to speak, nor do I have any messages in our chat system.
Very good, Andrew. Thank you. Do I have a motion and a second? No. Do I have a motion and a second to accept the consent agenda subject to all conditions contained in the case summaries as well as the September minutes?
Sure, Tom. Or Andrew, you want?
Either way.
Somebody has to go first.
Sure, I'll make the motion.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Great. Could we have a vote, please?
Certainly. Mr. Baker? Mr. Broom? Mr. Broom, you're muted.
I saw him indicate yes.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Fuller-Wilt?
Yes.
Ms. Jaco?
Yes.
Mr. Salibi?
Yes.
Mr. Savory?
Yes.
And Mr. Wolf?
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes.
Thank you. And our first case, please.
So this first case is 2313 Marion Street, a request for a certificate of design approval for new construction and site improvements on an abnormally shaped vacant lot on Marion Street in the Cottontown Bellevue Architectural Conservation District. This new structure will be situated between a one-story craftsman-style bungalow on the right and a two-story non-contributing multifamily structure on the left. A version of these plans were presented at last month's meeting, at which point the project was deferred to allow the applicant additional time to address the massing, sense of entry, rhythm of openings, and roof shape. During the meeting, the applicant presented an updated set of drawings that staff had not had the opportunity to review prior to the meeting. The plans presented today are largely the same as those presented at the previous meeting. And while the applicant has made several changes that help the plans meet more of the guidelines, staff still has several outstanding concerns related to the sense of entry, rhythm of openings, and roof shape. Staff is, however, recommending approval with several conditions. And rather than address all of the guidelines, I'll just address those where there are inconsistencies with historic examples in the district, starting with guideline number 6, sense of entry. Historic structures in Cottontown have strong senses of entry, with primary entry clearly delineated on the facade. The proposed structure has 3 doors on the facade, 2 French doors on the left side of the structure, and the primary entrance on the right side. These 3 doors are the only openings on the first story. While duplexes often have both of their entry doors on the facade, this is not a pattern found historically on single-family craftsman-style residences in the district. There are a few examples of French doors on the facades of minimal traditional style buildings. While the guidelines do not dictate style, when the structure conforms to a particular style, it should be consistent with historic examples found within the district. Staff finds that the additional doors confuse the sense of entry for the structure and is not consistent with historic patterns in the district. Therefore, the sense of entry as proposed does not meet this guideline. Staff is recommending that the French doors be removed and replaced with double-hung windows. Guideline 7, rhythm of openings. While the visible portions of the side elevations feature a rhythm of openings that is largely compatible with historic examples, the facade is a significant departure from historic examples in the district. The first story of the facade is dominated by the French doors, which are not found on visible portions of structures of this style in the district. In addition, the triple window on the second story is also not a feature found on historic structures in the district. Staff recommends removing the French doors and triple windows and replacing them with double hung windows in order to meet this guideline. Guideline 8, roof shape. Since the last meeting, the applicant has significantly altered the massing, which has also informed the roof shape. Many of staff's concerns have been addressed or resolved as a result of this change. However, when staff recommended extending the gable across the width of the facade, the intention was to move the front-facing gable as well. While craftsman-style structures feature feature some asymmetry. Two-story craftsman style structures in the district do not typically have asymmetrical roof features on the second story. A good example of this is 1403 Confederate Avenue, a two-story craftsman style structure, which includes a porte cochere that creates asymmetry on the facade. A photograph of this has been included in the evaluation. From both a design and functionality standpoint, staff is recommending that the front-facing gable be centered on the facade. As has been previously stated in previous meetings, new construction does not necessarily need to be duplicative, but it should be consistent with historic examples of its chosen style in the district. Ensuring that new buildings reflect the character of the district is an essential function of new construction review. This does leave room for distinguishing characteristics to allow new structures to be appreciated for both their compatibility with the district and contemporary design. However, the primary task of the commission is to determine whether a new construction proposal meets the guidelines and if it is compatible with patterns in the district. Based on the changes made by the applicant, staff is recommending the following. Staff finds that the proposal for new construction and site improvements at 2313 Marion Street is generally compatible with sections 5 and 8 of the Cottontown Bellevue Architectural Conservation District guidelines, and recommends granting a certificate of design approval with the following conditions. The front-facing gable be centered on the facade. The French doors be removed from the facade and replaced with double-hung windows. The triple window on the second story of the facade be removed and replaced with double-hung windows with the final number and location of windows to be worked out with staff. Materials, textures, and details for the exterior of the structure be submitted to staff for approval, and all other details deferred to staff.
Thank you. Is the applicant here? Do they wish to speak? I guess first, are there any questions for the for staff before we move on to that from the commissioners? Okay, then the applicant's here and wishes to speak. We're ready for that.
Yes, Michael Hagler, architect, and the owner, Diane Rushing, is also in attendance.
And do you promise to tell the truth in these proceedings?
Yes, we do.
Very good. Thanks.
Thank you, Albert. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to present our final design proposal for you today. We started this a few months ago, and with the intent to design a new house that would be sensitive to and compatible with the neighborhood. We think we've accomplished that with your help. Obviously, Cottontown has a variety of styles. Both the owner and I appreciate the detailing of some of the craftsman style homes, and we were interested in incorporating some of those details, particularly on the front facade. It was not our intent to copy a one-story craftsman cottage, but rather to use some of the craftsman details. And incidentally, the odd shape of our site precluded doing a one-story cottage anyway. The design has evolved and improved over the last couple of months with quite a few revisions to comply with staff and commission recommendations. As you can see in the staff report, we are now in compliance with most of these recommendations. We are asking for your approval, including the front facade as it's currently presented, and specifically to address the 3 items that Megan has highlighted as well. The French doors. The ability for the front room to open directly out to the front porch is important to how the owner sees the range of functions for that room. Within a block of this house or this location are several examples of homes that are not duplexes, but have multiple doors on the front. We anticipate painting the front doors to blend with the window color scheme while accenting the front door, the front door with a main accent color or dark stain. I have some examples of those other facades that are within a block of the house that I could share with you in a few seconds if I can. The upper gable windows, the use of triple windows is a detail that is not uncommon for craftsman houses, and I can show you an illustration of that as well in the neighborhood and also in reference books. The symmetry, as Megan mentioned, craftsman style structures often feature some asymmetry, and these asymmetrical styles are common for one-story houses, which in our case is how we are trying to present this house from the front and not accentuate or focus on it being a two-story house as it gets to the rear. To force a symmetrical location of the upper gable diminishes the symmetry of the current porch columns and windows, and also diminishes the accenting focus on the front door. Incidentally, the asymmetry is also a more honest representation of the actual floor plan layout of the interior rooms. So that's why we are continuing to try to allow these three items, and realize that they're going against the recommendation, but we're asking for your consideration. And if you would like to see any other examples, I can request to share my screen with you.
Whatever you would like.
I would need permission, so.
Okay. Michael, hang on just for one moment.
It looks like I can, if I can get to my.
Can you access it, Michael? There you go.
Yeah, I think I can. Let me see.
Okay.
Well, sorry.
Okay, we see your screen.
Yeah, but I can't get this. I'm looking for that. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry about that. So I was trying to illustrate several things. One, that in craftsman style houses, the triple window in a gable is a common solution for the gable treatment. And I'm going to run through these pictures to show you that. That has a round window on the front. On the side, it has a triple window. This one is a triple window both on the front and the side gable. That was where we were getting our inspiration. This is in the neighborhood, a triple motif, but it's achieved by shutters and it's a central window. Those are examples of different treatments of a gable. Now the others, here are the others that are French doors on the front facade. This first one is a white French door blending in with the windows as we're proposing, whereas the main window is there under their entry gable. The next one is a couple of houses up from our site, a French door that's on the porch, and then the main door is a different color, accenting color to focus on it more. This has 2 doors coming out to its porch. The main door is to the right. You can see a light. You don't see the main door, but that has 3 doors on the front facade. This is 1 block outside the neighborhood, but it's 2 actual double French doors on the front porch. And now I'm back into the gable examples. So I think that's what I wanted to share with you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just for a little bit of clarification, several of these examples were included. They were photographs that the applicant had previously sent. These are the instances where staff was referring to either structures of a different style or later alterations to structures to add additional doors. So just for a little bit of clarity or additional clarity there.
Thank you. Are you finished presenting, Michael?
Yes, thank you.
Does, before we go to the public, do any of the commissioners have any questions for Mr. Hagler or for staff for that matter? Okay. Then I think at this point, we should move to any public comments. We need to go back to a script, I think.
Tom, are you seeing the script?
I'm not.
Okay, hold on for me just one moment.
Thanks. Mr. Baker, welcome to the DDRC.
There we go.
All right. Okay. We encourage those that would like to communicate via email, general members of the general public, to begin sending in letters and email to cocboardmeeting@columbiasc.gov. We also encourage those who would like to leave a voicemail to call 855-925-2801 and enter meeting code 7949 when prompted, and then press *2 to begin leaving a voice message. We'll start to receive comments from the public who choose to speak via phone live by calling 855-925-2801. When prompted, please enter the meeting code 7949 and then press *3 to join the queue. And please make sure your computer audio is off when calling to avoid feedback. We will now hear comments that have been received in writing via email or letter. Please communicate by sending an email to cocboardmeeting@columbiasc.gov, and staff will read letters and emails into the record shortly.
Mr. Chair, I do not have any callers on the line.
Very good.
Christina, do we have any emails coming in?
We do not have any emails regarding this project.
All right, thank you.
Okay, no voicemails, I understand. Is that correct? Or I don't know. I guess we haven't established that. Are there any voicemails?
No, I apologize. I did not mention that. There are no voicemails nor callers right now that wish to speak.
Okay, very good. Okay, I think we keep rolling here.
Megan, just one quick question. You mentioned after Michael's presentation that many of the examples he presented came about as subsequent changes to the property, or were some of the examples of other styles that y'all mentioned. What's the significance of that, and why in staff's mind would that preclude the applicant from proceeding with their design plan?
Sorry, I forgot. So I think that's a great question. essentially the idea is that when a structure conforms or chooses a particular style, it should be consistent with the historic features of structures of that style in the district. So you wouldn't want to replicate a later alteration to a building that isn't necessarily consistent with that style in general. So with this particular instance with the French doors, the many of the examples that were shown were minimal traditional style buildings, so they're not craftsman style buildings, and none of the examples or none of the structures in this district that staff could find that were craftsman style had historic secondary entries on the facade if they weren't historically duplexes. Does that clarify at all?
It does. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, let's roll on through with any public comments, and then we'll get back to deliberate further on this application. And do we have anything logged into the web?
No, there are no additional comments.
All right. Any additional members of the public that have not been heard from?
No, sir.
Okay. Okay, keep on going. So let's circle back. I thought that was a great question, Andrew. I'd like to open it to, we've seen this project come through. This is the third time, I think. And I have some thoughts, but I would very much like to hear from other commissioners rather than from myself. If you all have comments or questions for the applicant. Okay.
One thing, just something I thought about as we were reviewing, or as I was reviewing the packet. Is there not an alternative here? Maybe some substitute that functions as a French door but looks like a double hung window?
I guess that would be a question for the applicant, Michael. Would you like to comment on that?
I don't think we explored that. There are instances where there are even double hung windows that are so tall you can open them up and walk through them, but it would take quite a bit higher ceiling height than we have. I think the probably the rub we're having, or the conflict, if you will, we're having is kind of this all or nothing thing when you are interested in using historic details but not making the whole house a craftsman house. So I understand from staff's perspective that if they think we're doing a craftsman house and they want it to be consistently a craftsman house, whereas in reality we were wanting to add craftsman details without having this all or nothing situation that we feel like we're in now.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from commissioners? Well, I think in my mind, I think the project has come a long way, and I feel as though each of the steps that has been taken, that has been primarily guided by staff recommendations and commissioner support of the staff recommendations, I think each one of those steps that has been taken has made a stronger project that's more compatible with the context, the historic context that it's in. My feeling is that this is a matter of gray area, and I think a matter of judgment call. The house is clearly not. It's clearly contemporary. It's clearly not Craftsman style specifically, it borrows from a few different, I think stylistically, a few different directions, which is not uncommon. And I don't, and this is just me speaking as an architect as much as anything else. I think we're at a point where I don't see significant incompatibility with the neighborhood, with a house that clearly is different from its neighbors on both sides, pretty significantly different. I think that there's been a lot of effort to conform to the in terms of making a design that's compatible with the neighborhood. I understand the issue about the French doors, but I don't think that the primary concern is to not create confusion about the main entry. And I think that probably should be the primary concern. In my mind, the way that the front entry has now been pulled up flush with the street facade, and it's directly in line with the stoop, I don't see much chance of confusing the main entry with the French doors. So I would be inclined to accept those French doors with the stipulation that the treatment, and we can't dictate color, but that every effort be made to distinguish the front door from the French doors. I think with respect to the gable, I feel as though there's really one of two things that would be appropriate up there. If the windows are switched to double hung windows, I think that would be an improvement, and I think it would be more consistent with the rest of the improvements that have been made in the design. I would support the switch to two double hung windows up there, but I'm afraid that if the gable is moved over to be symmetrical with two double hung windows, I think that the composition is going to be jarring, because it's not going to be compatible with what's going on the first floor compositionally. If the smaller windows remain and it moves over, then I don't think it's as much of an issue. But I think you'd end up with a very odd condition if you move the gable to be symmetrical and then put in two double hung windows. If you can imagine what that would look like, I think this helps you imagine that. So I guess my feeling would be one of two things: either put in the double hung windows or move this whole composition over so it's symmetrical, one or the other. And to my mind, I think that that's where I would fall on this. I think there've been a lot of improvements. I think that I think one of those two solutions with the gable, and it's, to my mind, I understand your and the owner's strong feelings about the design, and I think we've taken this design quite a ways since the first time that you presented it. And I'd like other commissioners to weigh in, because I don't really just intend to make a motion without dialogue with the rest of the commissioners on this one.
Well, Tom, I think that was a pretty good articulation of a little bit what I was kind of wrestling with that too, the bounds of giving some creativity to the design, but yet respecting the neighborhood. And I definitely agree with that with the door. To me, there is a sense of entry. I do feel that. So I thought that was very well stated.
Any others?
Just a comment, and this is largely an area of personal opinion, but I do agree with you that reaching a compromise when it comes to the gable as to the location of the gable, and whether they're allowed to keep the triple window or replace it with a double hung window. I tend to, in just looking at the the design of the facade. I kind of like the gable where it's at. So, and I guess this is a point where we can maybe get some comment from the applicant as to whether they'd be open to a compromise. As you suggested, Tom, either center the gable, make it asymmetrical, or replace the window.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm saying is either if you leave the triple windows, then I think it's the argument to move it over and make it symmetrical is compelling. If you put double hung windows in there, then I think that the double hung windows are such a strong compositional statement that they need to be in line symmetrically with the French doors and the columns below. So I don't think you put in the double hung windows then move the thing over. I think that would be compositionally jarring. But if you have the triple windows up there, I think moving it over would be a better composition. And because you don't have the double hung windows, it wouldn't be jarring relative to the first floor. Michael, I think to follow up with what Andrew is suggesting, maybe we could have you weigh in on this.
Yes, absolutely. I appreciate everything you said. We actually did a version that kept the gable where it is, but added the double hung windows up top and had it as a sidebar illustration of the staff's preference. But it got confusing that we were presenting two things at once. So we've explored the double hung, leaving the gable where it is, and are fine with doing that. I think the owner is probably jumping up and down in ecstasy over the possibility of having her French doors downward. So the compromise of having the French doors minimizing their visual impact, keeping the asymmetrical gable, but adding the double hung windows would be totally acceptable with her.
Okay. With that, would any commissioner like to make a motion? Unless anybody has anything else to say. We don't have Ms. Johnson here today.
I'll give it a shot. So let's see. I move to grant a certificate of design approval in accordance with sections 5 and 8 of the Cottontown Bellevue Architectural Conservation Guidelines, with the following conditions: that the triple hung windows on the second story of the facade be removed and replaced with double hung windows, with the final number and location of windows to be worked out with staff, materials, textures, and details for the exterior of the structure to be submitted to staff for approval, and all of their details for staff.
Excellent. Any further discussion? Oh, is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
Second.
Okay, let's have a vote.
Mr. Baker? Mr. Broom?
Yes.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt?
Yes.
Ms. Jaco?
Yes.
Mr. Salibi?
Yes.
Mr. Savory?
Yes.
And Mr. Wolf?
Yes.
Thank you.
The motion passes.
Thank you. Next case, please.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
All right, so this is 140, 142 South Walker Street. This is a request for demolition in the Shandon community character area. And just some information about the community character area. The CC1 overlay district was created by City Council in 2010 with the intent of protecting the existing character of communities against potentially negative effects of demolition and new construction. To facilitate the intent of the overlay district, DDRC and staff must review and approve all requests for demolition of contributing buildings within these community character areas. And just to note, new construction in community character areas do not require approval from DDRC. Some background on this particular case. Request for demolition of this particular property has been heard twice by the DDRC in August 2017 and in June 2018. In both cases, the application, the request was denied based on the application not meeting demolition criteria as listed in section 17674 of the city ordinance. A couple months ago, August 2020, the applicant did come forward with a new application. However, DDRC ruled to defer it as additional information was submitted to staff after staff evaluations were published. So DDRC deferred the case to allow staff extra time to consider the new information and to visit the property. And since that time, staff has visited the property with the applicant and reviewed the new submitted application materials, which includes a structural report, which had been requested in the past. From the provided additional information and in-person observation, staff has noted systemic issues with the construction of the building. I'm going to run through the demolition criteria. I know some of you have heard this a number of times, but we do have a few new commission members, so I want to make sure everybody understands all the criteria that we consider for review of demolition. So criteria 1, the historic or architectural significance of a building, structure, or object. This particular building is considered a contributing building to the Shandon neighborhood. This area of Shandon, which is the southeast area, was developed between 1920 and 1940s. This particular property was built in 1940, and it is reflective of several other buildings and patterns that you can see within the within the neighborhood, and particularly on this particular street, there are a number of other buildings with modest details like this building. So it is considered a contributing building to the district, or the neighborhood, I'm sorry. Criteria 2, a determination of whether the subject property is capable of earning a reasonable economic return on its value without demolition, with consideration being given to economic impact to the property owner of the subject property. And as staff noted in previous evaluations, this ordinance language does not suggest that any property owner is due an economic return. Real estate investment is complex and driven by many factors. The quotes that we currently have for repair have not been updated since the previously submitted applications. So going off of those, there is roughly a little south of $150,000 worth of repair that is proposed for this building. But however, staff's evaluation of the quotes that have been provided appear not to address all the issues that have been noted in the building, particularly with the new structural report that was submitted. For instance, based on the provided images and structural analysis of the roof, there is inadequate bracing and areas of significant deflection, and it's likely that a portion of the roof will need to be rebuilt, which was not reflected in the submitted repair quotes. So staff observation and updated structural reports. Staff found that all the foundation, much of the roof, walls, and ceiling and floors, would require significant replacement and rebuilding. So this is based on the new information provided in the structural report, as well as some staff observation at the site. And staff also feels that the quotes provided do not fully express the cost of rehabilitation of the building, meaning that the roughly $150,000 worth of quotes that were submitted would likely increase in amount. On the other hand, the applicant has stated that new construction on this lot would total about $280,000. Fair market values for single-family homes in this particular area can range anywhere from $150,000 to $450,000. And the lot built next door, which was built in 2005, that particular property is valued at roughly $320,000. Criteria 3 is the importance of the building, structure, or object to the ambiance of the district. So as stated previously, this is considered a contributing building. It's built in the minimal traditional style. Has a simple massing, low roof, and little to no architectural details. It is consistent with other houses, especially on this side of this block of South Walker. There are two other examples of minimal traditional style found at 120 and 128 South Walker. So it is consistent with patterns and contributes to the ambiance of this portion of South Walker. Criteria 4 is whether the building, structure, or object is one of the last remaining examples of its kind in the neighborhood, city, or region. And as I just stated, there are other examples of minimal traditional even on this particular block of South Walker, so it is not the last remaining example. Criteria 5 is if there are definite plans for reuse of the property, if demolition is allowed, and what that impact would be to the character of the area. And the applicant has submitted plans for a bungalow, I think a 2-story bungalow, and it appears to be generally consistent with nearby patterns. And staff has found that it would not have a negative effect on the character of the neighborhood. Yeah, and there is the example of the bungalow. So 1 to 1.5 story bungalow style house. Criteria 6 is the existing structural condition of the and maintenance of the property, whether it endangers public safety, and whether the city is requiring demolition. And I've been over some of the structure briefly. I mentioned there was a structural report that was just recently submitted, and staff took a deeper look at the attic and the foundation, which did both point to larger systemic issues within the building. So with the work that was estimated to be needed in 2018, there are inevitably additional or growing concerns with the condition of the building as it has been sitting vacant for a number of years. That would be true of any building that's been sitting untouched with no maintenance. However, the structural report from Chow does provide field observations. I think we have some images of their report in this presentation that you can see, and it's also provided in your evaluation. So their field observations did point to a number of issues with partition walls and floors due to deflection and settlement caused by inadequate and questionably constructed foundation piers. And again, these deficiencies in large parts of the building would seem to require replacement rather than repair. And that's going from the roof all the way down to the foundation. As I mentioned, issues in the walls, ceilings, floors. Criteria 7 is whether the structure is able to be relocated, and which is not currently a consideration for this particular building. And criteria 8 is whether the building or structure is under orders from the city to be demolished, which at this time it is not. So staff recommendations: while staff finds that the property has historic and architectural significance as a contributing building to the Shandon neighborhood, based on the systemic issues noted in the provided structural report and staff observation, the duplex would require significant rebuilding from the roof to the foundation. As per section 17-674E of the city ordinance, and based on the submitted information illustrating that much of the building is experiencing structural failures, staff recommends granting a certificate of design approval for the demolition of 140, 142 South Walker Street.
Thank you. So my understanding essentially is that the staff recommendation has changed over the course of from the first and 3 years ago. That this is really fundamentally based on reassessment after what has been 3 years of additional deterioration by staff after visiting the structure. That we have additional information, structural information from Chow and Associates specifically, and that your assessment also is that in addition to the cost that the applicant is claiming would be required, there's probably significantly more additional cost. And so that is those are really what's guiding this reversal 3 years later of the staff recommendation. Is that fair in a nutshell?
Yeah, that's fair. The structural report, was submitted finally, so that provided a lot of good information that we did not previously have. Yes.
Okay. So I think before I ask for invite the applicant to present, I also want to make it clear to everybody, the applicant, but also to the commissioners that as Rachel mentioned at the beginning, in this district, will not have any purview over what goes onto the site if we grant approval for demolition. But the fact that there are, I guess that there are plans for the site that are compatible with the neighborhood is a factor. But more specifically than that, it's outside of our purview. So all we're really talking about is whether or not we think that the property has, in the course of the 3 years, has deteriorated to the point where, and the additional information we have is cogent to the point that we decide to make a different decision at this point 3 years later. So anyway, with that as background, I understand that the applicant is present. Would he or she wish to speak?
Yes, sir. Mr. Lee Will.
And you promise to tell the truth in these proceedings?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Proceed.
Well, I don't have a whole lot to add, except I appreciate y'all letting us appear to you today with this project. I've worked on many historic houses in this area, so I have a lot of experience with them in Shandon and Heathwood and Wells Garden. So I've walked through this property many times, and from all reports, as Rachel mentioned, it is far beyond regular repair. I've repaired many houses, but none to this extent, where all the floor joists have 2 to 3, 4 inch deflections in them, along with the rafters, and foundations have many cracks. I do believe it is beyond repair. So, and I also believe removing the structure is the best option. And as far as for the plan that you saw, that's the one I plan on doing. It's like I did at 225 Sloan Street. I live in the neighborhood, so I like to keep all the houses up to the standards of what we have here. So I don't think y'all will have a problem with what we build. And,
thank you.
Again, I appreciate your time. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer.
Okay, well that again, as I said, that's sort of a good faith. That's about as far as it can go in terms of our what we do with the site if we grant this certificate. But before we move on to any comments from the public, do any of the commissioners have any questions for the applicant? Okay.
Sorry, dog's going crazy.
All right. I don't hear any. So we encourage those that would like to communicate via email to begin sending in letters and emails, COC board meetings at columbiasc.gov. Those who would like to leave a voice message, call 855-925-2801 and enter the meeting code 7949, then press *2 to leave a message. We'll start to receive comments from the public who wish to speak live, 855-925-2801. Press 7949 when prompted and *3 to join the queue, and make sure your computer audio is off. And now we'll hear any comments that have been received in writing by email or letter. Please communicate by sending emails to cocboardmeeting@columbiasc.gov, and staff will read letters and emails into the record shortly.
We do not have any emails at this time.
Okay.
Hi,
And
Tom,
likewise,
sorry,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
Yes, I do not have any callers on the line at this moment, and I do not have any voicemails nor comments logged into our chat system.
Let's keep going.
Tom, hi, this is Angie. When can commissioners ask questions of the staff?
Why don't we get through, see if we have any public comment, and then we'll move to discussion, deliberations.
Thank you.
Okay. Any voice messages?
No, sir.
Okay. Anybody who wants to comment in person on the phone?
Likewise, no. I do not have any callers that have raised their hand.
Okay.
Nor do I have any chat posts.
Okay. All right. And no other members of the public that have been heard in any other form?
No, sir. I believe Christina said that there were no emails.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So at this point, I think we can, Angie, to return to your question, discuss before we.
Thank you. Regarding the city not issuing a demolition order, are we aware of any ordinance code violations given to the owner since the time he's owned the property?
That's a good question. I'm not aware of any open code cases. I haven't heard of any. And the city typically would only issue a demolition ordinance. A demolition order, I guess, if they were brought out to the property to investigate and they found it issues. So I'm assuming there's nothing open at the moment.
So there's been no maintenance done on the house, which has allowed it to deteriorate to the point of structural damage, and there's been no code violations. Is that correct?
I don't know if there are open code violations. I do not have access to that at the moment. I would say structural condition has been poor based on what I saw underneath the house. There, the piers were very inadequately constructed, which you can see easily in the house with deflection in the floors and walls settling in odd ways. Up until this point, we had not received a full structural report. We had a couple of letters, but this is the first time we have actually seen a structural report for this property.
Okay, thank you.
Tom?
Yes.
With the second report from Child Associate explains further the extent of the damage and the foundation and the roof, what have you, exceed that the structure is damaged and cannot be repaired at a reasonable cost. If we were to approve the demolition, could we add a time frame or a deadline of 30 days, 60 days, 90 days to allow a permit to demolish the structure?
Are you asking if we can stipulate a time frame for demolition?
Well, we have another property that we approved the demolition in the neighborhood, and nothing's done. So my question is there a time limited for the permit to demolish the structure?
Staff, do you have anything to say about that?
I mean, after DDRC's decisions hold for a year, so if they were not to get a demolition permit within a year, they would need to apply again. As far as putting a time period on it, I don't know. Amy might have to speak to that.
Yeah, I would generally say we while I understand where Mr. Broom is coming from with that, but probably we wouldn't want to apply some sort of time frame generally around the demolition, but go with the 1 year allowance that we have with DDRC decisions.
Yeah, I think the fact that it expires in a year is probably incentive enough to get it done.
Well, as a follow-up, I would strongly recommend these structures to be demolished.
Any other comments or questions from other commissioners? Okay. I mean, I think that the argument is, you know, where we are here and now with the information we have is pretty compelling. It's frustrating that the house has been left to rot for 3 years, which is exactly what the owner said in 2017 that he intended to do, and it's happened. But we are where we are, so I would agree with staff recommendations at this point. If there's no further discussion, would somebody care to make a motion? Or
Sure. Yes, I'll make a motion. I move that the DDRC per 17-674E of the city ordinance and based on the submitted information illustrating that much of the building is experiencing structural failures, grant a certificate of design approval for the demolition of 140-142 South Walker Street.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none, could we have a vote, please?
Certainly, Mr. Baker. Okay. Mr. Broom?
Yes.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt?
No.
Ms. Jaco?
Yes.
Mr. Salibi?
Yes.
Mr. Savory?
Yes.
And Mr. Wolf?
Yes.
The motion passes.
Next case, please.
Okay, this is 608 Saluda Avenue. This is a request for preliminary certification for the Bailey bill. And I will just say most Bailey bill cases that we have are pretty routine, straightforward, which is why they end up on the consent agenda. However, some questions did arise about Bailey bill being applied to certain projects. So I wanted to take this time to clarify a little bit about the Bailey bill, as well as maybe introduce some of our new commission members to the concept, because we do review a lot of Bailey bill projects. But like I said, most of them are on consent. So I'm going to run through as succinctly as possible, basically what the Bailey bill is, and then run through what this particular project is looking at. So the Bailey bill is a preservation tax incentive for historically designated properties. There is state enabling legislation. It has been adopted at the local level, so properties within the city of Columbia can participate in this program. So basically what it is the property owner, if they have a historically designated property, and that can be a contributing or historic building within one of our local historic districts. It can be an individually listed landmark. It can be a property that's listed in the National Register, either as part of a district or individually listed structure. So it has to have some form of historic designation, either nationally or at the local level. So if a property owner has one of these buildings that is considered historically designated, and they are looking to invest some money into it through repairs, they invest 20% of the building value back into the building through approved expenses, qualifying expenses, which I'll go through what this particular property is looking to do in a moment. They get their property taxes frozen at a pre-rehabilitation rate. So basically they're investing money into their property, they're maintaining a historic structure, and they're potentially increasing the value of their property. However, they will be taxed at the pre-rehabilitation rate for the next 20 years. And so these have been applied, the Bailey Bill has been applied to a lot of the renovations that you see going on Main Street. Pretty much all of them on Main Street are participating in the Bailey Bill. Those are commercial properties, and then residential properties as well. We have 15 historic districts, so there's a lot of opportunity for people to participate in the Bailey Bill program, and we've had a good bit of participation, especially in the last few years. In this particular property, 608 Saluda Avenue, it's a 1921 two-story brick house, which does have most of its original historic features, as you can see in the image. And it is a contributing building, so it's a historic building within the Wills Garden Architectural Conservation District, which is one of our historic districts. The scope of work on this particular property, which is our eligible expenses for the Bailey Bill that we are reviewing, includes exterior work, which is roofing, exterior wood repair, and painting. On the interior, they will be doing plaster repair and refinishing original flooring. Bailey Bill qualifying expenses also include HVAC updates, electrical updates, and plumbing updates. Not cosmetic updates; those are not considered eligible expenses, but the wires, the pipes that keep a building running and functional are considered qualifying expenses, which in this case, the applicant, what they are proposing fits within those parameters of what a qualifying expense is. As a Bailey Bill project, they must, the scope of work must comply with section 17-698 of the city ordinance, which is the Bailey Bill ordinance, which has certain 8 standards that are reviewed when anyone is applying for this Bailey Bill project, as well as for the next 20 years. Anything that they apply to do, any changes must meet these 8 standards. And as a preservation incentive, removal of historic materials or alterations to historic architectural features is avoided and generally not allowed unless there is deterioration present, which in this case, there's not much deterioration that's been noted on this particular property. So the scope of work is fairly straightforward, just general maintenance and then some updates to the systems to keep the house whole and functioning. In this particular project, staff finds that the project at 608 Saluda Avenue complies with section 17-698 of the city ordinance and recommends granting preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill with the following conditions. The project should meet or exceed the 20% investment threshold requirements for qualified rehabilitation expenses. All work should meet the standards for work outlined in section 17-698, and all other details be deferred to staff. And I ran through that kind of quick, so if anyone has any questions, please let me know. And I believe the applicant is on the phone if you have any questions for him.
Well, thanks, Rachel. That was a great, actually, I think that was a really, really good and clear explanation of the Bailey Bill. Very fast. That was well done. The only, I guess I would have one question, and I think I know the answer, but perhaps I don't. In all of this, is the intended use of the building a consideration?
Yes, so sorry, I forgot to mention that. Yeah, we do not look at use. DDRC and preservation staff do not look at use of buildings. So commercial buildings, residential buildings, all as long as they're considered historic and they're historically designated in some way, they can qualify. Right.
So whether or not it is part of the consideration of the Bailey Bill, it is not part of the consideration by the DDRC, as is always the case. If something, for instance, meets zoning, it meets zoning, for instance, as another example, and how the building is intended to be used is not within the purview of the DDRC. That's general. That's true across the board, but that holds in this particular case as well. Correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for Rachel before we move on to the applicant?
Rachel, you mentioned that there were reasons it was kept off the consent agenda. I'm sorry, did you highlight that? I didn't pick up on that if you did.
There were particular just questions from the neighborhood about the Bailey bill being applied to certain buildings. So we just wanted to clarify on the record what this particular project is and what the Bailey bill is in general.
But no public comments for DDRC review.
Well, we'll get into that in a moment. It may be, I don't know. So I want to make sure we're clear as a commission, which is that staff finds that that it meets the requirements with some of their conditions, that it meets the requirements for the Bailey bill. Staff finds that, and we as a commission, our building use is outside of our purview, so it's not a consideration. So those are really the two factors that we need to keep in mind in making a decision.
This is Angie. I guess I don't understand, why it's not on the consent agenda as well. Can you clarify that further?
Rachel?
As I said, the neighborhood had questions
Okay.
and asked for it to be removed. So
Okay,
I'm not
thank
sure if
you.
anyone here is here to talk about that, but I just wanted to give a chance to explain it on the record.
Well, why don't we find out? Because I'm confused too as to why it's been taken off the consent agenda. So I guess we'll find out. But we need to go back and give the applicant an opportunity to present if they want to. We can just jump ahead. The applicant here, do they wish to speak? Is nobody here?
Bennett, are you there? I see his phone number, but I don't, but he's on mute and I'm, okay.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Sure, yeah, I don't know.
Excuse me, sorry, could you state your name and then I need to swear you in?
Oh, yeah, Bennett Stoneburner.
And do you promise to tell the truth in these proceedings?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Please proceed.
Yeah, I'm just interested to hear, whoever has a complaint. I can't imagine, what it would be to have gotten it taken off the consent as well. Like y'all had mentioned, it fits y'all's, qualifications for the Bailey bill. So I guess I kind of just am interested to hear as well.
Okay, very good. Let's move on then to see maybe this will answer our questions. We encourage those that would like to communicate via email to begin sending in letters and emails to cocboardmeeting@columbiasc.gov. Those who would like to leave a voice message, call 855-925-2801, enter the meeting code 7949, and then press *2 to leave a message. We'll receive comments from those who wish to speak by calling 855-925-2801, entering 7949 into the meeting code, and then pressing *3, and make sure your computer audio is off. And we will now hear comments that have already been received in writing via email or letter. Please communicate by sending emails to cocboardmeeting@columbiasc.gov, and staff will read letters and emails into the record shortly.
We do not have any emails at this time.
Very good. Okay, let's keep going.
Andrew,
And we do not.
Okay.
I apologize for that phone ringing, but
Okay.
we do not have any callers that have indicated they wish to speak. Likewise, I do not have any voicemails, nor are there any comments that have been logged in.
Okay, very good. Keep going. Are there any additional members of the public that have not been heard that have reached out in any way? Nobody?
Not
Okay.
to my knowledge.
I'm gonna take a guess that we probably don't have a whole lot of discussion and cut to the chase and ask if anybody would like to make a motion. And if I'm wrong, speak up, but otherwise, why don't we try that? Would anyone like to make a motion on this?
like to make a motion to grant preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill in accordance with section 17-698 of the city ordinance for 608 Salute Avenue.
With conditions?
With conditions, yes.
Conditions being that the project meets or exceeds the 20% investment threshold requirements for qualified rehabilitation expenses. All work meeting the standards for work as outlined in section 17-698, and all details deferred to staff.
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Do we have a second, please?
Second.
Any discussion? Do we have a vote, please?
Certainly, Mr. Baker. Mr. Broom.
Yes.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt.
Yes.
Ms. Jaco.
Yes.
Mr. Salibi.
Yes.
Mr. Savory.
Yes.
And Mr. Wolf. Mr. Wolf?
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes.
Thank you very much. And I think that is our last regular agenda application.
Yes. Yes.
Other business though.
We do indeed. We have some information on our historic resources survey, and Rachel Walling has been overseeing that project and working with the consultants. So I'm just going to turn it over to her.
Sure. So yeah, we are really excited about this. This is our final presentation for the Downtown Historic Resources Survey. We've had a couple consultants working on this project to kind of bring updates to the existing information we have, seeing what type of historic resources we might have in the downtown area. And a lot of it does focus on mid-century resources because for the most part, those are the resources that have not yet been documented. So we're really excited for Lydia and Stacy to present. I think they're gonna introduce themselves. And I think they need to screen share. I'm not sure, Stacy or Lydia, one of you going to do that?
Yes, sorry. Unmuting, and I did learn how to do this. Just a second, please. Okay. Although it's been wily. It doesn't want to give me my main screen. Hold on. There we go. Okay, good afternoon. My name is Stacy Ritchie. My company is Access Preservation, and Dr. Lydia Brandt is also here.
Stacy, we don't have your screen showing yet, do we?
It says I am screen sharing. No?
No. Hang on, Stacy. Maybe. Let's see.
It says
there you are. There you are.
You got it?
I'm seeing you.
See it.
Now you see it?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, good. And Dr. Lydia Brandt is also here today. She worked with me on this project. We worked together, and she will be creating a video of this presentation to put up on the city's YouTube channel, so you'll be able to see it again later if you need to. So I'll be going through it fairly quick. We are in compliance with all applicable laws because this was grant funded in part by the State Historic Preservation Office along with the City of Columbia. And if you'd like more background about this survey, there's a origin video, so to speak, that Dr. Brandt put together. It's on the city's YouTube channel. That talks about why this survey was done and a little bit about the things we were going to look for. So now this presentation is following up with everything we discovered, and it will also serve as our public meeting during the COVID situation. So instead of having public meetings where people can come in person, these will be shared on YouTube. So the survey boundary is seen here in blue. It covers most of the original city limits, but excludes some blocks along the southern border. There are three main components of this project, including a historic context report on the history of the buildings in Columbia, when they came along, why they were there, why they left. A survey inventory where we went building by building, street by street to capture photographs and write architectural descriptions. And then finally, recommendations for which buildings should be included in the National Register of Historic Places. So the first section was the historic context, and that had to do with researching the built history of Columbia. As you can see, this is just a brief snippet of the kinds of things we looked at. In this 1872 map, you'll see the red line along Gervais Street. And if you look north of Gervais Street, you'll see a huge density of historic buildings that is not seen south of Gervais Street. And it had a lot to do with the railroad tracks and swampy conditions and just wooded areas that were not developed as quickly as the other sections. So we expected to find more resources in that area, and we did. During our historic context, we did study the reasons why Columbia doesn't look the same as it used to. And a lot of that has to do with urban renewal during the 1950s and 60s. The city was incredibly aggressive with removing thousands of historic buildings, including a lot of shotgun buildings, through urban renewal and getting rid of blight. So substandard houses like those seen here were removed, including a lot of people were removed through the loss of residential areas, especially in African American neighborhoods. So the results of our survey. We surveyed historic buildings, objects, and sites up through 1975 because, as you know, 1970 is now 50 years ago and is considered historic, so those things are eligible. And we went up to 1975 to keep the survey kind of living for another few years. Only those things within the boundary, and of course things not already listed on the National Register. And here you can just see a couple of the sources we found that you're probably familiar with. One neat one was the bottom one, which is the remnants of the railroad track along Lawrence Street, a spur from that track, in a small outbuilding. So these are the resources that we found. We anticipated to find 750. We found 721. As you can see in the change column, this bore out something that we did find in the historic research, was that the residential use in downtown Columbia really dropped significantly during urban renewal. So the surviving historic residential buildings, a lot of them have been converted to commercial use. So that's what the minus 105 means on that second line for the change. Also, we saw newer structure types like parking garages come into play during the survey. So over half of the resources that we found date to the mid-century period, and that's because there have been older surveys and other sites listed on the National Register, so we're capturing things that have not been surveyed before. So of course that's going to include a lot of mid-century items built between 1945 and 1975. So 424 of our resources are from that period, and they were overwhelmingly built in the modern architectural style. So we thought, well, we have a lot of resources. How are we going to come up with recommendations for these? But unfortunately, a lot of our mid-century resources have been altered. So as you'll see on the top example, the downtowner on the corner of Main and Lady Street? Yeah, Lady Street has been converted several times. And this is what it looks like today on the top right corner. And then the bottom one, which is designed by Maynard Pearlstein, which has a drive-through to a rear parking area, has been heavily altered as well. These are just some of the examples of residential buildings. Driving around Columbia, you may think everything's been protected or everything's been documented in some way, but they haven't. And these are some of the resources that we found that are residential. For commercial, there's quite a variety. We have small little neighborhood shops, as well as larger multi-story buildings with additions from mid-century, like the upper left. And then in the middle, we have another example of trying to sort out how to park people downtown in the 1960s in this new formalism building on Gervais Street. Education resources, of course, those are overwhelmingly USC, and they have the best collection of modern resource buildings, especially these large monumental buildings in the city. We did find a variety of religious architecture ranging from vernacular to modern, and these are just some of the resources we found. There were other resources that we found that are not building per se. So the pedestrian bridge at USC, which is linking the older section of campus down to the newer section. If you've ever walked down Riverfront Park, you've walked past this coal chute, which is brick lined, and then the Seth Thomas clock from around 1908. So once we've done our historic context report and we have surveyed, then we start to look at forming recommendations both for the National Register and for the city. This is kind of the process that we go through. We are capturing resources through photographs. We assign dates to those. We did do more research than normal on this survey for mid-century because we had a lot of resources online that we could look through to identify some of those dates. And then we started to compile those things into themes or districts and then make a recommendation after we've evaluated them. Our recommendations go through the State Historic Preservation Office, and they have the final say on what is or is not eligible for listing in the National Register. So these are the commercial items that the state agreed with in terms of being eligible for listing. And these are some of those examples. So you can see that they range from a small neighborhood grocery to a high-style modern architectural office by Lyles, Bissett, Carlisle, and Wolff, which was a very influential, probably the most influential architectural group in South Carolina in the mid-1900s. And then on the bottom left, we have two survivors from what was a dense commercial collection on Assembly Street associated with the Jewish community. And then on the bottom right, Levy's Funeral Home, a black funeral home, is actually up for listing as we speak. It's going to be going before the State Review Board soon. For institutional, we have the mid-1960s post office, also by LBC&W, and then the South Carolina Archives building on Senate Street. We're probably the first in Columbia to recommend a parking garage, and the state agreed. This is the city's first municipal parking garage from about 1965 or 66, also designed by LBC&W, and they included those palm trees, which still survive. There are only 3 houses that we found individually worthy of listing, or 3 that the state agreed with, and that would be the 1870s Hayes Tunander House, which is an Italianate, and then Parsonage for Sydney Park, number 2, which is a brick 2-story house right near Main Street, 1 block off Main Street, and then the Nathaniel Frederick House. Frederick was I believe, the first licensed Black lawyer in Columbia, among many other accomplishments. For recreational, that's just the YMCA, built in 1911, and it still retains its inscription in the limestone on the first 2 floors. And then we get to our historic districts. So historic districts have a common theme and a common geography, and we recommended 6. The state agreed with 4 of those. These are those 4, and as you'll see, they generally are comprised of mid-century resources from the 40s through the 70s, a little bit into the 80s for the USC campus. The first one is actually a medical corridor. So on Hampton Street in the 18, 19, and 2000 block in the mid-1900s, it's kind of suddenly turned from older houses into this interesting little corridor of 1-story, and there's only, I think, 1 example of 2-story, mid-century, modern styled doctors and dentist offices. So the hospital was located in the 2000 block of Hampton, and these kind of congregated in that area, and they still survive today, largely intact. Hardin Street Black Commercial District we recommended as eligible. As you can see, Carver Theater there on the right side of the photograph is already listed, but this actually forms the only complete historic district for the Black community from the mid-1900s that survives in Columbia. A lot of them disintegrated due to integration, and this survived. Some of it is not necessarily in use still, but the buildings are generally intact. For University of South Carolina, so this map, just to orient you, is south of the Horseshoe Southwest, really. So the Carolina Coliseum is to the very west part of your screen. And these are some of the monumental mid-century buildings that we see throughout this part of the campus. So the East Campus, this is east of the Horseshoe. And this is including buildings like these, the Capstone House, Columbia Hall, and East Energy Facility. These are, again, large modern buildings showing the university campus's commitment to the modern aesthetic for its growth. So in addition to districts, we have recommended 2 multiple property submissions. If you're not familiar with these are buildings that coalesce around a theme but are not geographically adjacent. So the first recommendation was for apartment buildings, and you may recognize a couple of these here, but apartment buildings were an important part of the residential growth pattern of Columbia as the growth pattern changed by the mid-century. When a single family went away, we do see a big spurt of multi-story. So all of our recommendations are actually multi-story apartment buildings. Some of them are named, as you can see in the descriptions here, dating from the early 1900s all the way up through the mid-century. Our other multiple property recommendation was for mid-century office buildings. So among those hundreds of mid-century buildings that you saw in the earlier table, a great group of those really has to do with the office buildings. So the change that you see in Columbia is a loss of single-family residential and the introduction of the professional building and the office building in particular. So that modern aesthetic was applied to a number of office buildings, and we have grouped those into multiple property submission, and the state has agreed on at least some you see here, plus a few more as representatives. We recommended, I think, over 30, but the state agreed to about 8. So we'll include the rest of those within the report, just so if someone wanted to do more research, they could. We also wanted to provide some information to the city for potential local listings as landmarks and districts that your board would see. And these are the ones we recommended originally. So 1417 Pickens actually used to have a 2-story porch, now a single-story. The Masonic Temple now has vinyl siding. So there's buildings that have had a couple of changes perhaps, or are not necessarily eligible for the National Register, but might make good local landmarks. Constant Car Wash, for instance, has a couple changes on the buildings adjacent, but it has a great example of a pierced and crimped metal screen as its cornice and a wonderful sign. So these are some good potential local landmarks. In addition to some of the ones the state did not agree with for individual listing on the National Register, we still would include anything we recommended for the National Register as a local landmark or district. So these are some of the examples from that, which would include the Seth Thomas Clock. The Little Red Schoolhouse, if you're not familiar, at Riverfront Park was built around 1883 and is the last surviving private school from the 1800s in Columbia. And Steer Supply is a good example of a showroom / office building that is also modern in style. And I have lost my screen. Sorry. Okay. Also, the Wayne Street Historic District, which has had a lot of integrity issues over the years, but it's a good example of a black residential area that used to be a white residential area that changed in the 1920s. And we would add a residential section to that. Hold on just a second. Sorry, my battery's running low. I thought I plugged it in. We would add a residential section to that Hampton Street corridor, as well as 2 more residential buildings in yellow to round that out into a larger district. So finally, we had a few more recommendations. If you see on this screen, King's Jewelers is one of the last surviving and perhaps one of the most ornate slipcovers from the mid-century. This is about the mid-1970s that survives on Main Street. So a lot of the changes on Main Street in the last few years have been removing mid-century slipcovers. We would encourage some retention of some of that. We also made recommendations for existing historic districts for expansions or changes to periods of significance. And then we basically create a little laundry list or a wish list of things that we would like to see or encourage the city to pursue, including educating people about mid-century resources, about historic preservation as a development tool, conducting more surveys, obviously looking at other areas of the city, but also looking at potentially recording somehow some of the mid-century modern interior treatments, such as the one you'll see here on the bottom right, which is actually the city offices at Main and Washington Street. Also include a survey of the monuments in the city, because those are generally on public property, and I don't know who owns those, or if there could be a map made of those to find out who owns it, who can maintain those. Of course, we always need more research into African American sites and Jewish sites in the city, and also brick walls. Those may seem kind of minor, but brick walls used to be located in several places throughout the city, and they're somewhat at risk when they're not maintained. So those are our recommendations. This project basically resulted in this presentation, as well as a survey report, which will be available to the public. And it has the history I talked about, our recommendations and survey results, and then also all of our photographs and survey data will be available to the public as well, either through the city, or it will also be stored at the State Historic Preservation Office. And this is just a photo on the right of what used to be a pretty fantastic fountain on Main Street. And then in the middle, the tile mural, which still exists, but the water feature is now gone. So any questions you have for myself or Dr. Lydia, Dr. Brand, I'd be happy to answer.
Well, thank you, Stacy. That was wonderful.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
I think we have a tired out commission. That's
why I went fast.
Appreciate the presentation. That's very interesting.
Well, it'll be available to you on the web. So, and Rachel has my contact information if anyone's questions.
A couple buildings I didn't see. Of course, I know LBC&W extremely well. And maybe it's because 2 buildings that I didn't see. One actually was sort of got a sneak peek in the background. Maybe because they're slightly too new. I think they're just maybe, well, no. Was the Rutledge building, which is of course LBC&W, pretty heavily influenced by Gordon Bunshaft, because Stuart Basil was one of his proteges when he was at LBC&W, and he designed it. But then the other one, and I think it maybe is just too new, is the Strom Thurmond Federal Complex, which of course the most famous modernist that worked in Columbia. So I didn't see
Strom, yeah. Strom is already listed, I believe, on the National Register.
I think Rutledge I thought was as well.
I don't know that it is, because
it's in our report.
It is recommended by the state as eligible, so Rutledge is on the list.
Okay. So you touched on it. I'm just curious. about the sort of political will for, because I mean, buildings on the National Register have no protection whatsoever unless somebody's seeking public funding for them. How robust will the effort to try to get some of these buildings listed, protected by the city of Columbia? Because so often you see these things get demolished because the National Register protection just doesn't protect them all unless they're public.
Yeah, and we do have some new commissioners, so I don't know if everyone understands the difference between those things. But as Tom was saying, National Register is through the National Park Service, and it's a status program, and buildings who take advantage of tax credits as part of their program are protected to a certain degree, but other buildings that are simply listed on the register really it's just status and they have no protection, whereas local listings, historic buildings that fall within local historic districts or individual local landmarks have a great deal of protection with at least having a demolition review. So just in case folks didn't understand, that's the difference between the two programs.
Just so you know, on the LBC&W office building on Gervais, it once was the art commission. I worked in that building, and I got several replica of prints in that office, and they I don't know if it's on the historical places now, but they wanted to know when it was built, and I told them that it was 1959.
Right. Right. WCW used to be before that, they were in the top of the Burns building. The building across from the Horseshoe.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. They had the top floor. Okay. That's great. Thanks. Appreciate it, Stacey.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you to the city for hiring us for the project.
Yeah, we're super pleased with the report. It's so helpful mid-century. Modern resources are things people don't understand very well, and this is just such a valuable document. So thank you both for your hard work.
Any more other business?
Not from staff's end of things.
Okay. Could I have a motion to adjourn?
I'm making a motion to adjourn this meeting.
For a second.
Second.
All those opposed? Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.